I stood backstage at Paris Fashion Week, the spotlights sweeping over the runway like searchlights across a starry sky. My name wasn't just on the guest list anymore. It was printed on the banners, stitched onto every program, whispered through microphones as the official sponsor. I smoothed the silk sleeve of my custom blouse, the fabric cool against my skin, and pretended not to notice the stares that followed me. To them, I was polished, composed, a woman who belonged here. But deep inside, there was a part of me that still carried the weight of old words, sharp and unforgettable. My clutch vibrated. I pulled out my phone, expecting a routine message from my assistant. Instead, the name on the screen made my breath hitch. Madison. My sister. The same sister who once wrinkled her nose at the clothes I wore, mocking me in front of friends, calling me pathetic for dreaming I'd ever matter in the fashion world. And now she was here, at Fashion Week, reaching out. I stared at the message, just 5 words. Are you at the show? A bitter smile touched my lips. Of all the people in this crowded, glittering city, she was the last one I ever expected to see. And maybe the one I was least ready for. I was 19 when Madison's words cut deepest. It was our cousin's birthday, and I had spent hours stitching together a dress from thrifted fabric, the pale lavender material still carrying the faint scent of mothballs no matter how many times I washed it. I didn't have the money for brand labels, but I had my hands, a borrowed sewing machine, and determination. When I stepped into the living room, proud in my creation, Madison looked me up and down with a smirk that silenced the chatter around us. God, Claire, she laughed. You look like you raided a bargain bin. Do you seriously think anyone's impressed by that? Heat rushed to my face. I remember gripping the strap of my handmade clutch until my knuckles went white. My throat ached, but no words came. Everyone else laughed with her, even if half-heartedly. In that moment, I wasn't just wearing a cheap dress. I was wearing every ounce of shame she pinned on me. That night, when the party ended, I sat on the floor of my tiny bedroom. The old Singer sewing machine my grandmother had given me sat quietly in the corner, its paint chipped, its pedal worn smooth by decades of use. She used to tell me, hands that create beauty never know poverty. You just have to believe in what you make. I touched the cool metal of the machine, her words echoing louder than Madison's cruelty. Something in me shifted that night. I realized I could keep drowning in humiliation, or I could stitch a different future, thread by thread. So, I made a decision. The very next morning, I packed a suitcase with my few clothes, folded my sketches carefully between them, and left home. My hands shook as I locked the door behind me, but my chest felt strangely light. I didn't know where I was going, or if I'd even make it. But I knew one thing for certain. I would never let Madison's voice define me again. That chipped old sewing machine became the first thing I carried into my new life. The first apartment I rented was barely larger than a walk-in closet. The walls were cracked, the radiator hissed at night, and the only window faced a brick wall. But it was mine. And in the corner, beneath a single flickering light bulb, I set up Grandma's old Singer. I worked nights at a coffee shop downtown, saving every tip. By day, I sketched designs on receipt paper and stitched them into existence with fabric bought from clearance racks. My fingers bore calluses, and sometimes I pricked myself so badly I stained the cloth with tiny dots of red. But I kept going. For months, I sold nothing. The few dresses I dared to list online went unnoticed, buried under thousands of polished brands. I almost gave up until one evening, a boutique owner named Eleanor James walked into the cafe. She noticed the blouse I had made myself. "Where did you buy that?" she asked, brushing a careful hand over the sleeve. "I didn't," I admitted, cheeks burning. "I made it." Her eyes lit up. She asked me to bring a few more pieces to her shop. 2 weeks later, one of my dresses sold, just one, but enough to make me cry into my pillow that night. Eleanor became my quiet mentor. She critiqued my stitches, taught me about fabrics, introduced me to small-time buyers who were willing to take a risk. She never pitted me. She respected me. That respect was fuel when everything else felt impossible. Still, success didn't come easy. I worked through exhaustion, through nights when my bank account barely had enough for rent. I learned to stretch every dollar, to recycle scraps, to take rejection with clenched teeth instead of tears. Then, slowly, momentum built. An influencer wore one of my jackets in a street-style photo. A fashion blog featured my handmade dresses as affordable chic. Orders trickled in, and for the first time in years, I wasn't drowning, I was swimming. But I never told my family. I posted only safe updates, a smiling picture at work, vague captions about new projects. To them, I was still the struggling sister, the dreamer who never grew up. Maybe part of me wanted to keep it that way, to protect my fragile wins from Madison's ridicule, to avoid the risk of her sneer cutting through me again. By the time I registered my brand, Claire Monroe Designs, I was working with factories, negotiating contracts, and hiring assistants. My apartment had grown into a real studio. Yet at Thanksgiving dinners, I let Madison talk over me about her corporate job, her designer handbags, her flawless lifestyle. I smiled and nodded, keeping my secret tucked deep in my chest. What she didn't know, and what I couldn't yet say, was that I was no longer the girl in the thrifted lavender dress. I was building an empire, one stitch at a time. The doors to the Grand Palais were a blur of flashing cameras, velvet ropes, and security guards. My name, Claire Monroe Designs, was everywhere, on banners on the official program, even projected onto the towering glass ceiling. I had just finished greeting a handful of editors when I saw her. Madison. She stood near the entrance, craning her neck like someone desperate for entry. She wore a designer dress I recognized instantly. Off the rack, expensive but uninspired. She clutched her phone like a ticket to survival, her eyes darting across the lobby until they landed on me. For a moment, she froze. Then her lips parted in disbelief. Claire? I walked toward her, heels clicking against the marble. My staff parted to let me through, offering polite nods and soft ma'am's as I passed. The title made Madison blink. You're here, she stammered. I thought that I wouldn't be? I finished, arching a brow. Funny. I could say the same about you. She gave a shaky laugh, the same one she used to mask discomfort at family dinners. I got an invite from a friend, but I had no idea you'd actually be attending. Attending? I repeated, allowing myself a small smile. Madison, I'm not attending. I gestured around us, at the gilded walls draped in silk banners, at the assistants hustling by with clipboards, at the models wearing my designs. I'm sponsoring. Her face drained of color. She looked from me to the runway, to the screens flashing my brand name, then back to me again. This is yours, she whispered. All of it, I said, my voice calm but steady. The gowns, the show, the brand. The silence stretched, heavy with everything unsaid. I could almost hear the echo of her laughter years ago, calling me pathetic for dreaming. Only now the roles had reversed. A coordinator interrupted, asking if I was ready for the pre-show walkthrough. I nodded, then glanced at Madison. Would you like to see? She followed, almost in a daze. As we moved through the backstage halls, she touched the racks of gowns carefully, as if afraid they might shatter. She watched assistants take notes on my directions, photographers rushing to capture every detail. We stopped in my private lounge, a suite lined with fresh flowers, champagne, and framed sketches from my earliest collections. On the center table sat one more thing. Grandma's sewing machine, polished and preserved. Madison stared at it. You kept that old thing? Yes, I said softly. It built all of this. Her eyes filled with something I had never seen from her before, uncertainty. Maybe even shame. Claire, I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't realize what you've been doing. I cut her off gently. You didn't want to know. The words weren't cruel, just truthful. For years, she had dismissed me, ignored the hints, laughed at my dreams. And now, here she was, standing in the middle of proof that I had made it without her approval. She sank into a chair, her confidence unraveling. You're successful. More than me. God, she shook her head. You're everything I said you'd never be. I leaned against the table, fingers brushing the sewing machine. And you're finally seeing it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sounds of the runway echoed faintly beyond the walls, music pulsing, heels striking in rhythm, cameras flashing like thunder. But here, in my lounge, there was only silence, thick enough to drown in. Madison finally broke it. "Claire, maybe I could help. I mean, I've got contacts, business experience. I could join your team. We could work together." I studied her, the desperation in her voice, the way she twisted her designer bracelet nervously. Years ago, I would have grabbed at that offer, eager for her approval. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "You want in?" I said plainly. Her eyes flicked up to mine.
"Yes."
"I do." I let out a soft laugh, not cruel, just incredulous. "Do you even realize how ironic this is? You mocked me for years. You tore me down every chance you got. And now that the lights are shining, you want a piece of it." Her face crumpled. "I was wrong. I was jealous, insecure, call it whatever you want. But please give me a chance." I sat across from her, leaning forward, letting my words fall steady and deliberate. "If you really want a place in my world, it won't be easy. There are conditions." She swallowed hard. "Name them." "One," I said, holding up a finger. "You stop comparing people's worth to the labels they wear. Fashion is expression, not a weapon." She nodded quickly. "Two," I continued. "You support others, even when their dreams look impossible. No more tearing people down to make yourself taller." Her gaze dropped, shame flooding her features. "And three," I said, voice softening but firm. "You work on yourself. The toxicity, the arrogance, it has to go. You can't walk into my world unless you're willing to grow." Her breath hitched. She looked like a child again, caught between pride and regret. "Claire, that's a lot." "So is forgiveness," I replied. The words landed heavy, and for the first time, I saw her truly sit with them. No excuses, no laughter, just silence. I leaned back, exhaling. "Madison, I don't hate you. I never did. But I won't let you drag me back into the shadows I fought to escape. If you want a part in this, it's on my terms." Tears gathered in her eyes, surprising us both. "I'll try," she whispered. "I don't know if I'll be perfect, but I'll try." I gave a small nod. "That's all I'm asking." Beyond the door, my name was announced again, this time accompanied by thunderous applause. It was time for my show to begin. But for the first time, Madison sat quietly, humbled, not mocking, not smirking, just listening. The show was a blur of light and color, models gliding down the runway in gowns I had once dreamed of sketching on scraps of paper. The audience gasped, applauded, rose to their feet when the finale dress appeared, shimmering under the spotlights. I stood backstage, my heart pounding, not with nerves, but with awe. I had built this. I had carved beauty out of rejection, stitched strength into every seam. When the curtain fell and the applause thundered on, I turned to find Madison standing quietly in the corner. No phone in her hand, no smirk on her lips, just wide eyes and trembling fingers pressed to her mouth. "That was," she whispered, her voice cracking. "That was extraordinary, Claire." For once, I believed her. In the days that followed, something shifted. Madison didn't become perfect overnight. Old habits take time to unravel, but she tried. She asked questions instead of making jabs. She listened more, judged less. She even visited my studio, standing reverently before the sewing machine like it was an artifact of a faith she was only beginning to understand. I watched her trace the chipped paint with her fingertips. "Grandma would be proud," she murmured. "She would," I said softly. "Not because of the fame or the money, but because I never stopped creating." Madison turned to me, her eyes glistening. "And because you never stopped believing in yourself, even when I didn't." Her words hung in the air, raw and fragile. They weren't an apology carved in stone, but they were real. And for me, that was enough. Later that evening, I stood alone in my studio, champagne glass in hand. The city glittered beyond the windows, endless and alive. I thought about the girl in the lavender dress, humiliated in her own living room. I thought about the shaky hands that packed a suitcase and walked into the unknown. And I thought about the woman I had become, the sponsor, the designer, the survivor. I rested a hand on the old sewing machine, the metal cool beneath my palm. Grandma's voice echoed once more. Hands that create beauty never know poverty. I smiled, my reflection caught in the glass. The sister who once mocked my clothes, I whispered, now claps beneath my runway lights. And with that, I walked taller than ever.